Beware of over-delivery, you're creating patterns. This is perhaps the single most infamous line from a Bungie GDC talk, a game developer conference talk that they gave in 2022, wherein they were discussing how to successfully land a live service game like Destiny 2 year after year. And in this point, they discuss how it actually hurts the game and the developers and the community by quote-unquote over-delivering. Giving too much cool stuff to the community in the game that they're paying for on a seasonal or yearly basis will cause an increase in expectations that, when not met, will cause an overall downward turn in interest in the game. However, after a recent State of the Game article posted by the game's director, Joe Blackburn, I would argue that under-delivering creates a much worse pattern. And unfortunately, under-delivering is all we're seeing Destiny 2 do right now, especially after said State of the Game. So we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to highlight exactly what the issues that I have are going forward for whatever the lifespan of Destiny 2 is at this point. So, my name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Let's talk about Destiny, maybe one last time. We'll see. So yeah, we're back to Destiny. Obviously not something that we talk about regularly on the channel, and unfortunately the last few times we have talked about it here on the channel, it's been rather negative. Whether it's talking about how Lightfall as a product was an absolutely indefensibly terrible product that should not have been released in the state that it was, and has caused potentially irreparable damage to the reputation and future of Destiny, to the absolutely inexcusable price hikes and gouging, I would argue, that have been occurring in the game. Not even due to microtransactions, but literally just increasing the price of seasons and the general game for no reason other than supposedly inflation, which I don't buy for a second. And now we have the State of the Game 2023, as I mentioned, published by Joe Blackburn, the game's director. And, well, I'm a few days late to it, so you might already be familiar with how upset people are with this. The community has never before really been this united in outrage over something to do with Destiny. So I want to highlight a few points that are particularly impactful, and then loop that back around to explain why not just over-delivery creates patterns, but under-delivery as well. So, in this State of the Game article, which for those of you who don't know is something that's done semi-regularly to inform the community about how Destiny is doing, how the devs feel about it, what their plans are moving forward, how they feel about changes they've made recently, all that type of stuff, Joe Blackburn was discussing some of the changes that they have made and some of the concerns that the player base has been voicing recently. And, well, I mean, it wasn't good. Some might argue that the state of the game is calamitous, disastrous, absolutely falling to its knees, buckling under the weight of its own hubris, and I think that's probably a pretty fair assessment to make. So the number one thing that people have been asking for is updates on flagging game modes and issues in the game. For those of you who don't know, there are three core pillars of the way Destiny works. There's the Vanguard, which is basically strikes, nightfalls, cooperative player versus environment, player versus enemy experiences. Then there's the Crucible, which is your player versus player PvP element. This is where you're going in playing things like area control, team deathmatch, a very sort of classic shooter experience, 4v4, 6v6, multiplayer competitive environment. Cool, fun. It's been a pillar of Destiny from day one. It's literally half of the game. Then you have Gambit, the third pillar that was added, I believe, in 2014 or 2015 with the release of Forsaken. So it's been a part of Destiny 2 for an extremely long time. And it is a player versus environment or enemies experience where you have two teams of 4 battling AI-controlled enemies like you would in the Vanguard playlist, but then occasionally fighting other players as they invade your game and you invade theirs, and the two teams compete to see who can win by collecting the most resources before time runs out and one or the other team defeats their boss. These three game modes, these three aspects of the game comprise the core of the game as it exists. Yes, there are other activities, including endgame activities like for PvP, Trials of Osiris. For PvE, you've got raids and dungeons, things like that. Then there's the seasonal story content, all that type of stuff. But these three aspects are the absolute center of what Destiny is. And two of those three pillars have been suffering severely over the last 3-4 years. First of all, we have to talk about Crucible. Because again, Crucible has been with us since the start of Destiny. It is one of the two aspects of Destiny that have always existed. And for a lot of players, it's the sole reason that they play Destiny. A lot of people who played Halo competitive, who played just, Halo 2 and Halo 3 online on Xbox Live. When Destiny came out, they switched over to Destiny. And the reason that they play player versus environment stuff to get loot and everything is to bring it into the Crucible and be able to dominate and battle their opponents and win and be competitive. It's a huge chunk of the player base. And unfortunately, the Crucible has been severely neglected. Very few new maps, very few returning maps. A lot of maps were removed from the game at one point or another, whether it be from the transition from Destiny 1 to Destiny 2, or when a bunch of content was sunset to try and shrink the size of the game, make it easier for Bungie to maintain. A decision that was universally agreed to be a pretty bad move, and they've been working on trying to reverse. And we've been lucky to get a new PvP map a year, and one singular reprised PvP map a year. And Bungie has a variety of reasons why they say that this is, but it's been pretty universally stated that it's causing issues for the game. It's causing Crucible to be stale. PvP mains are bored and upset and angry when they see all these other shooters out there come up with multiple new maps a year, new game modes, new abilities, new guns, things that keep it fresh, and yet Bungie doesn't seem to be able to deliver. So, after many years of stating that general sentiment towards this is bad in the community, Joe came forth and addressed it. He said that the reason that there are not more new PvP maps for Crucible is because it would take away resources from other areas of the game that need it more. Because there is not a dedicated PvP team for Destiny anymore, or at least that's what we have to assume. He didn't outright state that, but seeing as how we know that the majority of the people who used to work on PvP in Destiny have been moved over to their new project, Marathon, it's a pretty easy assumption to make. And if they have to pull people from other areas of the game just to make Crucible content, and that they believe that that will have an overall negative impact on the game because of that, that tells you that they don't have people just dedicated to working on this stuff, which seems pretty bad for one of the core pillars of the game that's been in existence since the game came out. Seems like a little bit of a problem. Because of this, while the team hears people's concerns, they're not going to be doing anything. There's one new map coming out that they've been telling us about for a long time. One reprised map coming out that they've been telling us about for a long time. And no current set plans on when there will be more coming out in the game, because it's just too resource intensive. They don't have the resources to dedicate to making a single new map in their game that's like 50% PvP oriented for their PvP oriented mode. Just don't have the resources for it. Bungie, the massive 1,500 plus employee company that got bought out by Sony for $3.5 billion, can't put the resources to making a new PvP map. Okay. Cool. They can make new game modes that just require them to change some variables around, maybe add a couple of things to the Crucible that weren't in it before that already existed elsewhere in the game. That's about it. So that's good. PvP mains, I guess just deal with it. Speaking of people who need to just deal with it, let's talk about Gambit for a second. So, if the Crucible is one of the two most important aspects of the game, because it's been with us from the beginning, Gambit is probably slightly less important, right? It came into the game with Forsaken, and is fun, but has never quite been super popular, because it didn't really gel with as many people as just straight-up PvE or PvP content, but there were plenty of people who liked it, and there's been a lot of work that's gone into it. Except for the last few years where it's been so neglected that Bungie has literally just not even mentioned it in any of their update articles for months. People called that out, seemed a little concerned that, again, one of the 3 pillars of the game was not being updated or even discussed. So Joe came forward to talk about it. The issue, apparently, is that there's not enough player interaction with Gambit to warrant Bungie investing anything in Gambit. So, they're just not. There's going to be no updates for Gambit, and it's no longer going to be one of the 3 pillars of the game. They've demoted it from one of the 3 core aspects of the game, and other than occasionally adding a new gun to it that you can go in and grind to try and get exclusively from Gambit, there's not going to be any reason to play it anymore. No power increases, no weekly challenges, nothing. If you want to avoid ever playing Gambit again in Destiny, you don't have to anymore. The only thing that they're doing, other than occasionally tossing a new gun into the loot pool, is they're bringing back one of the 2 maps that got removed from the game when there was a bunch of sunsetting happening. Again, this happened years ago, and they're now finally bringing back 1 map. And they're adding 2 partial new enemy factions that, again, have been in the game for, in one case, over a year. In the other case, well, since the beginning of Lightfall. They're just tossing them in there to spice things up a little bit. And that's probably the last they're ever going to touch Gambit. Now, of course, one has to wonder, well, would not people be playing the mode more if you actually tried to do anything with it? And the answer is probably yes. But, nah, it's not worth the investment. Maybe that would be considered over-delivery. Working on one of the 3 core aspects of your game at all. Probably over-delivery. Then we continue to things that Bungie directly promised and haven't delivered on. For example, armor. Each of these core pillars of the game have their own loot pools. Mentioned that with Gambit, and that's true for Crucible and Vanguard as well. And one of the things that people have always known to exist, not expect, but just exist, is new armor for those game modes. You know, it used to be back in like Destiny 1, the early days of Destiny 2, there was unique armor for each of these game modes that was emblematic of what those game modes represented, their own unique designs, color schemes, all that type of stuff that reflected what the game modes were. Then, Bungie switched gears and created one armor set with unique colors and decals for each of the 3 modes. So it was kind of like a core set with its own little bit of flair for Gambit or Crucible or Vanguard, which was still fine. And they said that there was going to be new armor that would replace the old armor, or at least be added in addition to it, for the 3 game modes in a similar fashion. One set of armor with different decals for each, every year, with every new expansion, because there's an expansion every year. And then that just didn't happen for like a couple of years. People are like, you guys literally said that you would be creating this armor every year with every expansion, and you just haven't done it, and you haven't said anything about it. So, like, what's happening? And so Joe addressed that. And he said because people don't really use them, because people don't really make transmog varieties with them, meaning that you can turn, like, any helmet, say, into this ritual playlist helmet. It's just not worth it. It's very resource intensive to make a new armor set for the core playlists once a year. So because people don't really seem to be using it, we're just not going to do it anymore. We're changing what we've stated about that, and it's just not going to happen. We have a new one that we're working on that'll come out, next year with the final shape? Or I guess this year now, but that's it. We don't really have any plans for anything else going forward. We're certainly not going to be doing everything on a yearly basis anymore because it's just too resource intensive. We don't have the resources for that. Which, again, here's the question. If it's too resource intensive to make one new armor set a year for the big yearly expansion, which is supposed to be sort of equatable to a big yearly game release, why is it that they're able to create 2, 3, 4, 5 sets of armor a year to put in the paid cash shop? They suddenly have the resources for that, don't they? Interesting. And remember, they're talking about how they don't have the resources for any of this stuff, and yet they've also just jacked the price of the 3-month recurring seasons up to $12 from $10, except it's actually $15 because you can't buy $12 worth of the Bungie Destiny currency silver in the store, you can only get $10 or $15 or a $10 and a $5 bundle to get to that $12. So realistically, it's actually a 50% price increase. And they don't have the resources to make one armor set a year for their big annual release that you're paying $50 for. Can't get armor in that. But you can buy a $20 armor set from the store. Interesting. Very interesting. They also know that the stability of the game has been really bad. And this is something that I talked about when I was discussing the issues with them jacking up the price of the game, is how the game is barely functional on a day-to-day basis. It's been better in the last couple of weeks, but pretty much since Lightfall came out, the game has been down for extended periods of time, at least once a week, if not 2 or 3 times a week, outside of the daily scheduled maintenance, or weekly scheduled maintenance, depending. It depends on how bad the game is doing, but... And while they've gone over it in the past, there's a lot of technical things that they wanted to discuss with the community to let us know that they're working on making it better, but, I mean, no guarantees that that's going to work. So that's great. And then finally, issues with the way the story was presented and how it sucked and Lightfall was terrible. And they're now giving us bits of the story piecemeal to fill in the gaps that really should have been filled in with the actual story that they told that people bought and paid for with Lightfall. And yet they now have to buy into other seasons to get the rest of the story that should have just been told in the first place. And that's not bad. That's just them experimenting with new narrative styles that they're confident will pay off better in the long run than if they just told a cohesive story to begin with and then added on new story elements and provided extra context for in the seasons to come leading up to the next big story reveal. So this is where we come back around to the concept of over-delivery. Remember, beware of over-delivery. You're creating patterns. If you give people more than what they were expecting, they will then expect that level of content or quality for the rest of time going forward. And you know, maybe that's true. Maybe that's accurate. But that's not what we're seeing happen here, is it? What we're seeing is consistent downward sliding under-delivery. We've gone from yearly updates to the core playlists that add new content in terms of maps and game modes and weapons to chase, new loot, new armor, to, well, we're not really going to be adding many new maps anymore. We're not really going to be giving unique armor for each of these modes, but there's like one united set of armor with special decals and everything that you can still get. And like, we'll still add some new maps every once in a while. To, we've removed maps and we will now no longer be providing new armor to the loot pool on a yearly basis. And it's literally too hard for us to be even regularly bringing back old maps that were already in the game and have been removed because they need to update them to the new lighting engine. And apparently that's such a process that they just can't do it with any sort of regularity. And also, one of the 3 core pillars of the game is just not worth investing into, so we're just demoting it and not really going to work on it anymore. Does this sound like over-delivery or even avoiding over-delivery, or is this just lowering expectations until the game essentially has nothing happening in it anymore? Because that's certainly what it feels like to me. And now we've created a pattern of expecting that there's nothing to look forward to, right? Because now we've seen what's happening with Destiny. And I'm someone who's always been a big fan of Destiny. There's a reason that my profile character is a Guardian from Destiny. It was one of my favorite games for a long time. And while it's had its ups and downs, it's always maintained a certain level of quality that has caused me to still enjoy it and even recommend it at times. Now, I can't do that anymore. Because now there's a pattern of an ever-increasing downward slide into mediocrity. And why would I buy into anything? Why would I pay for new content in the game? Why would I recommend the game to anyone I know when it's clear that it's only getting worse and worse? I don't know. But it sure does seem like a pattern. And I think in Bungie's quest to avoid over-delivery, they've kind of gotten themselves into a negative feedback loop. And I don't know how easy it's going to be to pull themselves and the community out of that. There is a showcase for the Final Shape, this year's big expansion, and what is supposed to be the big finale to the story that Destiny's been telling since its inception. That is supposed to be the absolute highlight of the series, but now, with current events, with how bad Lightfall was, with how stable or not the game has been, with how divisive and controversial this state of the game was, people are going in extremely lukewarm and expecting something, anything that looks halfway decent, instead of just being excited. And we're going to be watching it. I'm definitely planning on watching the showcase. I believe it's August 22nd. We'll be watching that stream to see if there's anything other than just marketing fluff that implies that there's going to be some sort of substance to this big finale to Destiny's main story. Because I would love there to be. If Final Shape seems good after it comes out, and it doesn't seem like there's a lot of issues with it, people are actually saying, okay, there's quality here, there's content here, then I'll play it. Because it'll be the way to cap off a 10, 11, 12, at this point, year journey in a game that I love. Or maybe loved. But what's interesting is Bungie claims that after the Final Shape, the game will continue. There will be a new saga, new seasons, new expansions, new story. And without any prior investment, and with the way the game has been trending down, and with it being so very clear that all of Bungie's attention is on their new projects, I have absolutely zero reason to care or buy into that content. And I think a lot of people feel the same way because there's this pattern of mediocrity and under-delivery. So yeah, I don't know how Bungie's going to handle this going forward, but because this State of the Game article was so bad and made it so clear what Bungie's stance is on currently developing the game, I had to talk about it. Because it's kind of the tragic death of a game that, from behind the scenes, has had a big impact on this channel and on me. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you are a Destiny player or a former Destiny player like myself at this point, and you've been following how things have been going here, let me know what your thoughts about the state of the game are. I'm not trying to be a big negative Nancy here, but there's just nothing positive to work with right now. And I'd love to be talking positively about the game because, I mean, I had a lot of good to say when we played Witch Queen on the channel back when it came out, but things have changed severely for the worse. So let me know your thoughts, and yeah. We will see what happens on the 22nd with the showcase. Until then, though, thank you to my supporters, my YouTube members, my patrons. You can see all of their names here. And, yeah, my name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And say a prayer for Destiny. It needs it. Bye now.